The breaking point. Nova Colony had always been unremarkable in the eyes of the Galactic Empire. Nestled on the outer rim of the spiral arm, it was just another human settlement, productive enough to be useful, small enough to be overlooked. The colony's inhabitants lived simple lives, focusing on their hydroponic farms and mineral extraction operations that helped supply the Empire's endless appetite for resources. Sarah Chen was 16 when everything changed. She worked in her family's hydroponics lab, teaching herself advanced biochemistry between shifts. Her parents often said she was too smart for Nova Colony, that she should apply to one of the prestigious imperial universities. But Sarah loved her home, loved watching the double moons rise over the crystal plains while she conducted her experiments. The imperial inspection wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 months. When the cruiser appeared in the colony's orbit without warning, Governor Martinez tried to contact them for explanation. The response was curt. Surprise compliance inspection. Landing in 20 minutes. Have your facilities ready. The inspection team consisted of 6 Zenthi officers, tall, gray-skinned humanoids with an air of casual superiority that had become the Empire's trademark. They moved through the colony's facilities with cold efficiency, barely acknowledging the humans around them. Sarah was running late that morning, rushing to the lab with her latest experiment results. She hadn't heard about the inspection. Communications had been too rushed to reach everyone. As she rounded the corner into the main hydroponics complex, she collided with one of the Zenthi officers. The officer's environmental scanner, a piece of equipment worth more than most colonists made in a year, crashed to the ground. Sarah immediately dropped to her knees, apologizing as she reached for the device. "I'm so sorry. I can fix this. I know how these work." The blast from the officer's particle weapon left a hole in the corridor wall where Sarah had been kneeling. Her body crumpled silently, the data tablet she'd been carrying skittering across the floor, leaving a trail of broken glass and dreams. The officer would later claim he thought she was reaching for a weapon, that her sudden movement triggered his combat training, that it was an unfortunate accident, but ultimately the girl's fault for running in a restricted area. None of that mattered to the people of Nova Colony. What mattered was Sarah Chen's mother, finding her daughter's body while the Zenthi officers continued their inspection, as if nothing had happened. What mattered was Sarah's father, a quiet man who had never raised his voice in anger, having to be restrained as he tried to attack the officer who killed his only child. The Empire expected the incident to be forgotten like so many others. They had dealt with human outrage before. A strongly worded complaint here, a diplomatic protest there. Humans were scattered across thousands of colonies, divided by distance and cultural differences. They had no real military, no central government. They were subjects of the Empire, nothing more. But this time was different. This time, the Empire had made a fatal mistake. Sarah Chen wasn't just another colonial teenager. She had been corresponding with scientists across human space, sharing her research on improving hydroponic yields in low-gravity environments. Her death wasn't just a tragedy for Nova Colony. It was personal for communities across human space. The news spread through unofficial channels, passed from ship to ship, colony to colony. Sarah's last messages, her research notes, her dreams of improving life for outer rim colonies, all of it became fuel for a fire that had been smoldering for generations. Within days, human colonies began quietly canceling their contracts with imperial suppliers. Ship captains started finding excuses to delay or reroute imperial cargo. Nothing too obvious, nothing that could be called outright rebellion. Just 1,000 small acts of defiance, growing larger by the day. In the prestigious imperial universities that Sarah never got to attend, human students began dropping out, taking their research with them. On worlds where humans and imperial citizens had coexisted for generations, the humans started withdrawing from social circles, their usual warmth replaced by cold courtesy. The Empire noticed these changes but dismissed them as temporary emotional reactions. They had ruled for 10,000 years, overseen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. What could they possibly have to fear from humans? They would soon learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in weapons or numbers, but in their ability to unite against injustice. The death of Sarah Chen became a symbol, not just of imperial cruelty, but of humanity's resolve to never let such a tragedy go unanswered. In the darkness of space, on colonies and stations and ships across the galaxy, humans began preparing. They didn't call it revenge. They didn't call it rebellion. They simply looked at their children, remembered Sarah Chen, and knew that things had to change. The Empire had ruled the galaxy through fear and technological superiority, but they were about to learn that killing a human child would cost them everything. The storm was coming, and this time, humanity would not stand alone. Silent preparations. The human response began not with a bang, but with a whisper. In the 3 months following Sarah Chen's death, the Empire noticed nothing unusual, just a slight decrease in productivity, easily attributed to the normal fluctuations of colonial life. But beneath the surface, humanity was awakening. Dr. Marcus Rivera, who had once been the Empire's leading expert on quantum communications, disappeared from his prestigious position at the Imperial Science Academy. The Empire logged it as a retirement, another aging human choosing to return to his home colony. They didn't notice that he took with him detailed knowledge of the Empire's entire communication network. On the mining colony of Titan's Edge, Elizabeth Wong watched the memorial video for Sarah Chen for the 100th time. As chief engineer of the colony's mineral processing facilities, she had spent years maintaining Imperial mining equipment. Now, she began looking at that equipment differently, noting vulnerabilities, studying failure points. Her maintenance logs remained perfect, but her private database grew. The Empire's strength had always been its technology. Their quantum drives were centuries ahead of human designs. Their neural networks could process data faster than human computers. Their energy shields could withstand any conventional attack. But they had grown complacent, letting humans maintain their systems, trusting in their own superiority. In the asteroid fields of the Kuiper Belt, retired military officer John Santos started gathering former soldiers. Their training sessions looked like simple security drills, standard practice for outer rim colonies. The Empire's sensors didn't detect the subtle modifications being made to civilian ships, the careful stockpiling of supplies, the creation of secure communication channels. The humans knew they couldn't match the Empire's military might directly, but they had something the Empire didn't understand: generations of experience adapting Imperial technology to human needs. Every colony had its engineers who kept Imperial equipment running with human-made parts. Every outpost had its technicians who had learned to bypass Imperial security systems to perform necessary maintenance. On Nova Colony, Sarah Chen's parents received thousands of messages of condolence. Hidden within those messages was a growing network of coordination. Sarah's mother, Dr. Lisa Chen, began organizing her daughter's research contacts. The Empire saw grieving parents receiving support from their community. They didn't see the creation of the most sophisticated underground communication network in human history. The Chen Network, as it came to be known, used Sarah's hydroponic research as a cover. Agricultural data flowed freely between colonies: crop yields, growth rates, atmospheric compositions. Buried within that data were coded messages coordinating humanity's response. The Empire's AI systems, designed to detect military communications, saw only routine scientific exchanges. In the laboratories of Europa Station, Dr. Yuki Tanaka made a breakthrough. She had spent years studying the Empire's energy shield technology, trying to improve human defenses. Now, examining the data from Sarah's last experiment on mineral absorption in plants, she found something unexpected. The same principles that allowed plants to selectively absorb nutrients could be applied to energy fields. The Empire's supposedly impenetrable shields had a fundamental weakness, one that had been hiding in plain sight. The discovery spread through the Chen network. Across human space, scientists and engineers began working on weapons that could exploit this weakness. They didn't build warships or artillery. Instead, they created devices that looked like standard mining equipment, agricultural tools, or maintenance robots. Each piece was harmless alone, but together they formed an arsenal unlike anything the Empire had faced. The humans knew they would only get one chance. The Empire's retaliation for any failed rebellion would be swift and merciless. Every step had to be perfect, every piece in place before they made their move. 6 months after Sarah's death, humanity was ready. The Empire still saw nothing unusual, just scattered human colonies going about their business, perhaps a bit more quietly than before. They didn't see the network of preparations spanning human space. They didn't notice the subtle changes in their equipment's performance, the carefully orchestrated positioning of human ships and resources. In his new hidden laboratory, Dr. Rivera put the finishing touches on a device that would turn the Empire's quantum communications network against itself. On Titan's edge, Elizabeth Wong completed her analysis of every critical failure point in Imperial mining operations. In the Kuiper Belt, John Santos' security teams stood ready, their ships disguised as ordinary transports. On Nova Colony, Dr. Lisa Chen sent out one final agricultural report. Hidden within the data was a simple message: for Sarah. The response came back from every human colony and settlement. For Sarah. The Empire had killed a human child, expecting the same resigned acceptance they had seen for generations. Instead, they had united humanity in ways they couldn't imagine. Their arrogance had blinded them to the quiet strength of the people they ruled, the innovation born of necessity, the determination forged by generations of colonial life. The storm was about to break, and the Empire would never see it coming. The first strike. The Empire's central command station orbiting Centauri Prime was considered impregnable. Its quantum shields could withstand a direct hit from a stellar core explosion. Its AI systems could detect and neutralize any approaching threat before it came within firing range. Even its maintenance systems were automated, requiring minimal interaction from organic beings. Which was why Commander Vexthal of the Imperial Guard felt no concern when the routine maintenance request came through. The station's systems had flagged several mining vessels approaching, carrying replacement parts for the quantum shield generators. Their credentials were perfect, their documentation flawless. Just another day in the smooth operation of the Empire's military machine. The first sign that something was wrong came when Dr. Rivera's device activated. Throughout the Empire's quantum communications network, a cascade of microscopic errors began appearing. Nothing serious enough to trigger alarms, just enough to create subtle delays, tiny gaps in the perfect flow of information. In those gaps, Elizabeth Wong's knowledge of Imperial systems proved devastating. Maintenance robots throughout the station began executing their normal routines with slightly modified parameters. Shield harmonics shifted by fractions of a percent. Power distributions adjusted by margins so small they barely registered. The mining vessels, John Santos' disguised fleet, moved into position. Their holds contained not replacement parts, but weapons designed by Dr. Tanaka, each precisely calibrated to exploit the weaknesses that humans had discovered through generations of maintaining Imperial technology. At exactly 300 Imperial Standard Time, Dr. Lisa Chen sent out her final agricultural report. The data packet contained detailed information about mineral absorption rates in zero-gravity environments. It also carried the signal that humanity had been waiting for. The attack began not with weapons, but with silence. Throughout human space, every Imperial communication channel suddenly went dark. Dr. Rivera's device didn't just interrupt communications. It turned the Empire's own quantum network into a weapon, creating a cascade of failures that rippled through their command and control systems. Commander Vexthal was still trying to understand why his emergency channels weren't working when the shields failed. Not catastrophically, but strategically. Microscopic gaps appeared in their coverage, invisible to the Empire's scanning systems, but precisely mapped by generations of human maintenance workers. The mining vessels struck with surgical precision. Their weapons, disguised as standard mining equipment, fired through the gaps in the shields. Each shot hit a critical system that Elizabeth Wong had identified, systems whose weaknesses she had studied for years. Imperial troops rushed to battle stations, only to find that their automated defense systems were responding with devastating sluggishness. The maintenance robots, reprogrammed by Wong's subtle modifications, were interfering with critical systems while appearing to perform their normal duties. In orbit around Nova Colony, the Imperial cruiser that had brought Sarah Chen's killers arrived for another inspection. They found themselves surrounded by civilian ships, freighters, passenger vessels, mining craft. Before they could raise shields, they discovered that their weapons had been subtly sabotaged during their last maintenance cycle. Across human space, the pattern repeated. Imperial strongholds found their sophisticated defenses compromised by the very maintenance systems they had trusted humans to manage. Communication centers fell silent as Dr. Rivera's device turned their own network against them. Military vessels discovered that their superior technology had been quietly undermined by years of calculated sabotage disguised as routine maintenance. The Empire had expected a rebellion to look like their previous conflicts. Fleets of warships, waves of soldiers, direct confrontations between military forces. Instead, they faced an enemy that had turned their own arrogance into a weapon. Every system they had trusted, every piece of technology they had assumed was secure, became a vulnerability. In the first hour alone, humanity destroyed or captured 30% of the Empire's military infrastructure, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through intimate knowledge of Imperial systems and the patience to exploit every weakness. The Empire's response was hampered by their own hierarchical nature. With their quantum communications network compromised, each Imperial facility had to make decisions in isolation. Their AIs, programmed to expect direct military threats, struggled to identify and counter the multiple layers of sabotage the humans had built into their systems over years. From his hidden laboratory, Dr. Rivera watched the cascade of failures spreading through the Imperial network. On Titan's edge, Elizabeth Wong monitored the systematic collapse of Imperial infrastructure. In the Kuiper Belt, John Santa's fleet struck target after target, using their disguised weapons to devastating effect. And on Nova Colony, Dr. Lisa Chen stood in her daughter's hydroponics lab, watching the reports come in. The Empire had killed her child, believing that humans would accept it as they had accepted so much else. Instead, they had triggered their own destruction, undone by the quiet strength they had never bothered to notice. The first strike was only the beginning. The Empire was wounded but not defeated, and humanity knew the real battle was just beginning. But they had shown the galaxy something unprecedented. The Empire was not invincible. Their technology could be turned against them. Their power could be broken. The storm had broken, and the galaxy would never be the same. Empire's desperation. High Admiral Xenvorth stood in the ruins of the Central Command Station, his gray skin pale with fury. Around him, Imperial technicians worked frantically to restore their systems, stripping out human-made components and replacing them with pure Imperial technology. But the damage wasn't just physical. It was psychological. The Empire's myth of invincibility had been shattered. How? He demanded, addressing the Emergency Council of Imperial leaders. How did these primitives hide this from us? The admission of ignorance burned in his throat. The Empire had ruled for millennia, their superiority unquestioned. Now they had been humbled by a species they had dismissed as barely worth noticing. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. Fleets of warships descended on human colonies, intending to crush any resistance through sheer force. But they found the colonies evacuated, the vital infrastructure destroyed or booby-trapped. The humans had anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. Dr. Lisa Chen's network proved its worth again. As Imperial forces approached each colony, residents disappeared through hidden evacuation routes, leaving behind automated systems that continued to transmit normal activity patterns. By the time the Empire realized they were attacking empty settlements, The humans had regrouped in hidden locations throughout the galaxy. The Empire's attempts to restore their quantum communications network failed repeatedly. Dr. Rivera's virus had become embedded in the system's core protocols, making each attempt to purge it create new vulnerabilities. The Empire's technical superiority, maintained for thousands of years, had become their greatest weakness. In desperation, the Empire turned to their oldest tactic, overwhelming force. They began assembling the largest fleet in their history, stripping defenses from their core worlds to build an armada that would crush humanity once and for all. High Admiral Xenvorth would personally lead the assault, determined to restore the Empire's honor. But the humans weren't idle. Elizabeth Wong's knowledge of Imperial systems had been shared throughout the Resistance. Every human who had ever maintained Imperial equipment now knew exactly how to disable it. The Empire found their supply lines disrupted, their equipment failing at critical moments, their mighty warships crippled by seemingly minor malfunctions. The Empire's attempts to rebuild their infrastructure revealed another problem. They had relied on human labor for so long that many of their own citizens had lost the practical knowledge needed to maintain their technology. Attempts to replace human workers with Imperial citizens resulted in cascading system failures. In the Arcturus sector, an Imperial battle group cornered what they thought was a defenseless human convoy. Instead, they found their weapons systems compromised by subtle changes made during their last maintenance cycle. The resulting battle ended with 3 Imperial dreadnoughts captured intact, their crews forced to evacuate by their own malfunctioning life support systems. Dr. Tanaka's research continued to yield results. Each Imperial attempt to adapt their shields was met with new weapons designed to exploit different vulnerabilities. The humans weren't just fighting with technology. They were using their deep understanding of Imperial systems to stay one step ahead of every countermeasure. The Empire's desperation grew. They began executing any non-human maintenance workers, refusing to trust anyone who wasn't of pure Imperial blood. But this only accelerated their decline. Centuries of relying on others had left them unable to maintain their own infrastructure. Systems began failing across Imperial space, not from human sabotage, but from simple neglect. High Admiral Xenvorth watched his mighty armada assembling and felt, for the first time in his long life, a sense of doubt. The Empire had always won through superior technology and overwhelming force. But how do you fight an enemy that knows your weapons better than you do? How do you defeat an opponent that can turn your own systems against you? In her hidden command center, Dr. Lisa Chen received reports of the Empire's preparations. The massive fleet gathering near the Imperial core worlds would have once struck terror into human hearts. Now, it represented something else, an opportunity. The Empire was gathering its remaining strength in one place, exposing themselves in ways they never had before. The humans had learned patience. They had spent generations maintaining Imperial technology, learning its secrets, discovering its weaknesses. They could afford to wait while the Empire exhausted itself trying to regain control. Each failed attempt to restore their former dominance only made them more vulnerable. John Santo's fleet, now greatly enlarged by captured Imperial vessels, continued its hit-and-run attacks. They never engaged in direct battles, instead striking at supply lines and infrastructure. The mighty Imperial Armada found itself struggling to maintain basic operations as its support systems crumbled. The Empire had started this war by killing a child, expecting no consequences. Now they found themselves fighting an enemy that had spent generations preparing for this moment. Their own arrogance had blinded them to the quiet strength building among those they had dismissed as inferior. As High Admiral Xenvorth gave the order for his armada to begin its advance, he couldn't know that he was leading the Empire into its final battle. The humans were waiting, and they had saved their most devastating weapons for this moment. Price of arrogance. High Admiral Xenvorth's armada emerged from quantum space near the Arcturus sector, their arrival heralded by the displacement of 1,000 stars. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in Imperial history, 10,000 warships, each capable of destroying an entire colony. The Empire had stripped its defenses to the bone to gather this force, believing that one overwhelming strike would finally crush the human resistance. The sector appeared empty. Long-range scans showed no sign of human vessels, no indication of resistance. The Admiral allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Finally, they would corner these vermin and destroy them completely. In her command center, Dr. Lisa Chen watched the Imperial fleet's arrival through the eyes of 1,000 hidden sensors. The Empire's desperate gathering of forces had played directly into humanity's hands. Now, everything they had prepared for was about to unfold. Dr. Rivera's final modification to the quantum communication network activated silently. Throughout the Imperial fleet, ships began receiving subtly altered navigation data. The changes were microscopic, coordinates shifted by fractions of a degree, velocity calculations altered by minimal margins. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, just enough to ensure that when the fleet moved, they wouldn't be quite where they thought they were. The Admiral gave the order to advance. The massive fleet moved forward in perfect formation, a testament to Imperial precision and power. They were so focused on maintaining their impressive display that they didn't notice the scattered debris floating in their path, remnants of previous battles, perfectly ordinary in a sector that had seen so much combat. Elizabeth Wong's last gift to the Empire activated as the fleet passed through the debris field. Each piece of wreckage contained microscopic machines, built using Imperial technology, but programmed with human ingenuity. They attached themselves to the warship's hulls, indistinguishable from normal space dust. The Imperial fleet approached their target coordinates, ready to unleash their overwhelming firepower on any human resistance. Instead, they found themselves surrounded. John Santos's forces had positioned themselves in a perfect sphere around the Imperial Armada, using the navigation errors introduced by Rivera's code to maneuver into the Empire's blind spots. But it wasn't the human fleet that struck first. Dr. Tanaka's final weapon activated, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a subtle resonance that spread through the microscopic machines attached to the Imperial ships. The frequency matched exactly with the harmonic vulnerability she had discovered in Sarah Chen's last experiments. Throughout the Imperial fleet, shield generators began to fail. Not dramatically, not obviously, but fundamentally. The quantum fields that had protected Imperial ships for millennia simply ceased to exist. The mighty Armada found itself suddenly vulnerable, their superior technology rendered useless by principles discovered by a teenage girl on a farming colony. High Admiral Xenvorth realized too late what was happening. He tried to order his fleet to retreat, but Rivera's modifications to the quantum network turned his commands into gibberish. Ship captains, unable to receive coherent orders, began acting independently. The perfect formation dissolved into chaos. The human fleet struck with precision born of generations of studying Imperial tactics. They didn't target the warships directly. Instead, they fired on specific points that Wong had identified, locations where Imperial engineering had sacrificed redundancy for efficiency. Critical systems failed across the fleet as carefully hidden weaknesses were exploited. Imperial crews, trained to rely on their superior technology, found themselves unable to respond effectively. Their automated systems were compromised, their manual controls unfamiliar after generations of neglect. Ships began colliding as their navigation systems failed, their crews unable to compensate manually. In the chaos, something unprecedented happened. Imperial ships began surrendering. Crews who had never questioned their supremacy faced a choice between death and surrender to those they had considered inferior. The Empire's iron discipline cracked, then shattered. High Admiral Xenvorth watched in horror as his mighty armada disintegrated, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through human understanding of Imperial systems, understanding gained through generations of patient observation and careful planning. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the largest fleet in Imperial history had been defeated without a single human casualty. The Empire's military power was broken, their technology turned against them, their arrogance become their undoing. In her command center, Dr. Lisa Chen received the reports of victory with quiet satisfaction. She opened a channel to what remained of the Imperial leadership. Her message was simple: "The Empire killed my daughter, believing there would be no consequences. You thought humans were weak because we worked for you, maintained your ships, served your needs. You never understood that we were learning, preparing, waiting. This is the price of your arrogance." The Empire surrendered 3 days later. Their remaining forces, scattered across the galaxy, found themselves unable to operate without the human workers they had taken for granted. Their mighty technology, deprived of the maintenance they had dismissed as beneath them, began to fail. In the aftermath, humanity emerged not as conquerors but as leaders. They understood better than anyone the importance of cooperation, the strength that comes from working together. The Empire's former subjects, impressed by how humans had defeated their oppressors, looked to them for guidance. On Nova Colony, a new memorial was built. It honored not just Sarah Chen, but all those who had suffered under Imperial rule. The inscription read simply, "They thought we were weak because we served. They never understood that service teaches strength." The galaxy would never be the same. The Empire's fall marked the beginning of a new era, one where cooperation replaced domination, where understanding was valued above force. It was an era built on the quiet strength of those who learn, adapt, and wait for the right moment to act. In the end, the Empire's greatest mistake wasn't killing a human child. It was failing to understand that every act of cruelty plants the seeds of its own destruction. They never realized that true power lies not in technology or force, but in the patient determination of those who refuse to accept injustice.